Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nick Suter, and with me today is 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿, as always, and 𝗢𝗙𝐴 𝗏𝗏𝐬. Gentlemen, how are you guys?
Okay.
I'm doing well.
Yeah, it's been well, and you've been without air conditioning, 𝗓𝐴ndring. I can't even begin to imagine. Holy smoke. Well, it's interesting. Air conditioning. So we've got on two people who scientists who for whom global warming is a passion of a topic, but also in particular science communication, which is its own challenge. And rather than do a huge introduction, I'd like to bring them out right now. We got Greg of the Peer Review and Jason Torn. Gentlemen, how are you?
Hello.
Hey, how's it going, Nick?
It's going good. Been a while. Well, we've had both of you on a couple of times. Jason, it's been a little longer. Greg has been gracing our air several times now. Jesus, I might actually have to start paying you almost as much as I pay 𝗓𝐴ndring. I won't go that crazy, but
finally.
Oh, so I did want to ask, we've got, real quick, just for people who don't know, if we could just do CVs for the two of you. I'm going to assume, 𝗏𝗏𝐬𝐬, 𝗓𝐴ndring have both been here repeatedly. But Jason, if we could start with you, just tell us a real quick bit who you are. We've got the links to all of these fine gentlemen, down in the description. But Jason, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I'm Jason Torn. I think I know a lot of people on your channel. So my background, I have a PhD in climatology. My master's is a focus on geological processes, surficial processes. And I'm currently at the University of Idaho. And most of the work that I do is at the intersection of climate, health, and agriculture. A lot of my research is associated with agricultural effects, mitigation aspects with climate change in terms of agriculture, but I actually work right now at the University of Idaho. I work at a molecular biology institute. And so I'm kind of intersecting my work with climate and biological processes. So great to be on, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the science communication pieces. I'm interested in this. So.
I'm hopefully. And Greg from the Peer Review, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I got nothing. I want to talk to Jason. I was working in an algae biofuels lab starting in 2010 as an undergrad. Then I went to a plant biotechnology company doing automated molecular biology, doing genome engineering and next generation sequencing. And then now I'm a PhD candidate in a microbiology program, working in a nanotechnology lab, looking at ways to improve algae and study algae through nanotechnology-based methods. So I don't work on the climate side like Jason does, which is really cool. I actually get to talk to the actual climate scientists about this stuff. But I'm kind of working on making the organisms better, making them more productive, making them kind of just produce more lipids, or try to figure out ways to manipulate them so we can, improve their processes.
All right, we've
so
actually
when the zombie apocalypse happens, we know who to blame.
You're going to blame you. You are always on the zombie apocalypse. You are fixated on every time we have homozygote
It must come. It has to come. I spent way too much money in guns and ammo for it not to happen. So it better happen, damn it. Somebody get on it.
We're working on it for you. All right. So, Christopher, so let me ask you. We were talking just in the green room as this started, and you've got yourself kind of in both fields here, psychology and in science. You work a lot in both. Why is it? And we've all seen. Oh.
Did you just say I work both in psychology and science, as if those are two separate things?
I did. Do you have that reverb on purpose, or is that just is that the voice of 𝗲𝗲 has suddenly become
attempting to get leverage over you for having said such a silly thing?
Oh dear Lord! Well, you see, here's the thing, which is I control the cameras, so you're going to have a problem with the leverage there. Unfortunately, since all of the guests are tied to the same sound bus, I could close the shield, but they can still hear you. So I really kind of it's much more. I pretend to have far more control over this show than I actually have.
I pressed the wrong one. All right. So yeah, haha, funny Nick. Make fun of 𝗲𝗲. Psychology is not a science. Got it. I have a whole episode about that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think it's more of an art, but it depends on whether you're doing research or clinical, I suppose. But at any rate, and you teach, so don't tell me that's not an art. But fine. Bust my balls on it. I understand. We could be educating people right now, but you're going to give Nick a hard time. I get it.
Listen, we are in the presence of legit scientists.
Fair.
Let's give respect where respect is due. Right? I publish peer-reviewed articles. I co-author them, right? I manage a lab that does things. These guys are the real deal. I'm a glorified lab tech by any other standard.
Listen, that's you. I'm a YouTube host, so you're still like light years ahead of me on all of this. But yes, that said, you were saying
my insecurities.
We need to stop denigrating each other. I'm just a freaking truck driver, so stop it.
Oh no, your knowledge of the last unicorn goes down in legend and song.
Okay, so I'm a truck driver that has lots of times to listen to the audio version of The Last Unicorn and can quote it word for word, the entire book. That's still not doing science. Trivial.
I'm impressed, bro.
I can also do that for The Lion King, just since we're putting out our qualifications here. I'm just here to listen to you guys.
All right.
I made a question.
All right. Well, you see, Jason, I told you, like, ostensibly the topic today is going to be science communication. We haven't gotten there yet, but my hope is in the next, 20 or 30 minutes. So, Christopher, you were. Yes. I think you were going to say something. My general question was, I think, sort of, why is it so hard to reconcile, effective communication in science? We've seen, I think, far more failures of it than we have successes. Why is that?
Well, even before most recent event being, of course, COVID, and, the pillorying of Anthony Fauci by certain factions of the public or the media or whomever. Science communication was and has been and still is and will be its own topic of study. There is a science of science communication. In fact, I think that's what the Oxford Handbook. There's an Oxford Handbook of Science Communication. I think it's called The Science of Science Communication. But one of the reasons is science takes super big ideas that are counterintuitive and attempting to package them in a way that people will trust you that this thing that goes against their folk psychology, their naive psychology, not in a bad way, just because, not everyone studies psychology. So your perception of why people do what they do is naive psychology. But the tools that they have applying it to science, they're inadequate. They're inadequate weapons in the battle for scientific knowledge. So trying to package these somewhat obtuse, very abstract concepts that are complex and sophisticated into understandable terms itself is difficult. And then for people that do already understand the variables and still misunderstand it or have an allegiance to a misinterpretation of it, it makes things more difficult, right? So the reflex would be, and I'm going to just try to bumper sticker this and then kind of play the field of the panelists to see what their experience is on this. But the intuition, the reflex, is what is called the deficit model, which is something that I'm not a fan of. I was a fan of because it made perfect sense. It was like, oh, you think that different thing than me, scientist, that non-scientific thing, because you're a layperson who has a deficit in your understanding of this topic. And the solution is filling those deficits with more knowledge, such that you now have the same knowledge as the foundational knowledge necessary to come to the correct conclusions. Therefore, you will. And it never works, because that position inherently leverages you in a way that not everybody likes. As an example, I like to listen to lectures for fun. Great Courses is one of the Audible jams. You know, I have a whole channel of them. When I tell other people that I listen to lectures for fun, they think that I've lost my mind. It's not for everybody. I'm happy to have somebody break down a concept for me. Other people are insulted when others try to do that. So, before I go into some of the ideas I have to work against the deficit model, I think now is a good opportunity to kind of get a feel for you guys. Based on your field, your attempt to talk to other people that aren't in the field or are scientists about what you do, and the misinterpretations of things that they bring to the table, how do you handle it? Or more appropriately, for fun, for myself and the audience, what are some of the major misperceptions in your field that you have to deal with? Mine would be aromatherapy. We'll talk about, and pheromones. I study the psychology of smell, so I have to talk about those at dinner parties constantly. But we'll talk about my worries later. I already talked too much. Tell me about you.
What do you think, Jason? You want to
go? I'll let you go first. If you, I'm happy to go first, but if you want to, you can.
Okay. Well, I think that it's it's interesting. I've been really thinking about this, like in the deficit model. Is the term that makes total sense. There is kind of like a way of describing science at like a higher level that I feel like that isn't like dumbing it down. And that's kind of what I tried to do. I tried to, tell people, like, if I'm going to use jargon, like, use the jargon, but then explain what the term means and explain the history of it or something like that. And I feel like so much of the scientific like education and how we communicate things is just dumbed down to the point where you're not really learning, something about it. And that I feel like, I feel that actually people are smarter than we give them credit for in general. We just talk down to them rather than talk to them. And I think that it's disrespectful, but I think that you have a really good point where science communication is different than actually doing science and doing bench work and all that kind of stuff. And, experimental modeling, you're using controls, all this kind of thing is a completely different skill set than actually communicating science. And you talk to professors and stuff like that, and they're like, man, I'm already doing so much. Like, I'm already wearing all these different hats. I'm the CEO, CSO, CTO, CFO, and now I got to go and outreach too. And, a lot of times outreach is pretty much on the bottom of the list. If you're trying to become a professor somewhere, if you're going a tenure track, like they don't really respect outreach that I feel like it should be given to the deference, and some
outreach, people shouldn't do outreach. Right. Some people are horrible at describing what they do.
Yeah. That's not, I guess, like, what type of outreach is the good question, right? It's like judging a science fair, for example, that versus going and doing like a demonstration at the public library versus having, a volunteer from a high school come into your lab versus this. Like, is this outreach? And a lot of professors wouldn't see this as outreach, but I do. I think it's science communication. I think that I try to be professional on here. I treat it that this is hopefully that it is educational and it is outreach. So that's my kind of like spiel. I'm interested what Jason feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I would concur with what Chris was saying about the deficit model, and that there certainly are unique techniques to be able to communicate in ways that try to get past, or it's kind of not like a frontal assault of, you're somebody that doesn't understand a particular topic. Here, let me, the expert, try to explain it to you, because once you've understood it, you're obviously going to change your mind because I'm the expert and you don't know what you're talking about. So let me explain it to you. That obviously does not work. And I can tell you from my experience, I'll give you two very specific examples. I've worked on two very large multidisciplinary, 50, 60, 70 scientist teams. The first one was what's called a coordinated agricultural project. It was funded by USDA NIFA. It was called, if I can get the acronym right, Regional Approaches to Climate Change for Pacific Northwest Agriculture. It's a big, long term, but essentially it was looking at climate adaptation and mitigation issues and its associations with agriculture in the Pacific Northwest. So it was a $20 million project, 5 years, to not only do multidisciplinary research, but to work with stakeholders, farmers, policymakers, to help to, I would say educate, but to help to explain the particulars in terms of the relationships of climate with agriculture. And that was a very difficult project. We had some we had sociologists and psychologists engaged to help on this area of how do you educate on these topics. And the one thing I would mention is that it was a partnership. We brought the farmers and other individuals in the beginning of the research to say, this is what we're thinking about doing. What are the limitations and things that you would like to see out of this research? You, the expert, the farmer who knows their farming, knows how climate works in your area, has to deal with the financial and economic implications. We're not here to tell you how to do your farming. We want to partner with you to understand this and then work together to be able to figure out a way to address some of these issues. So, that kind of facilitation process, I think, is really a good approach. It's very difficult. It takes time, and it takes developing relationships with those stakeholders to be able to understand where they're coming from, their economic implications, their generational implications, their religious implications. The other project I worked on was a part of a 𝗦𝗸𝘆 Regional Integrated Assessment Science Team. NOAA has these teams around the United States that are regionalized to focus on these kinds of science communications issues. And that team was focused on also agriculture, but also focused on sea level rise and the impacts on coastal communities. So a very similar type of approach, building stakeholder commitment and trust, working on the science in tandem with the stakeholders, making them feel like they're a part of what was going on. So just kind of wrap this together, that this science communication issue is a very complicated topic, and I think it requires scientists to be willing to take a step back and say, look, I may understand these topics, but this frontal assault isn't going to work. How do we do it in a manner that we're doing this as a community and we work together? And guess what? Maybe I'll actually learn something here. I'm the professor, but maybe I'm going to gain some knowledge that not only will be beneficial to the community, but will be beneficial to my research, which is the thing that most of these scientists really care about. Like Chris was saying, most of them are like, hey, outreach is great, but what I really care about is my research and publications and grant money. So if that's going to help with that, great. But this integration, I'm not necessarily so keen on that. Maybe that will help to change scientists' minds on that topic. So I'll just stop there because I kind of ran on. But I like this topic of trying to figure out, like, how do we broach these issues with the public in a manner that will get them to come on board potentially with some of the concepts that we've been presenting. So,
well, let me ask a question real quick. Is that sort of frontal assault method is one reason that scientists tend to maybe go for that, because that's actually how scientists tend to talk to each other. That tends to be how, if you're trying to get a grant, you want to present as much information as possible, right? You want to make sure that you've included everything so that there's as few questions as possible, and so that and the mindset of the people you're talking to is they are in fact expecting you to come with that knowledge and to explain it to them in that way. So it sounds like the day-to-day communications and the communications that's not only the bread and butter, but really the necessity for functioning in the scientific field is in fact kind of that model. So you're really trying to do the opposite. Would you gentlemen say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I'd say like only Siths and non-scientists speak in absolutes, right? So it's like very rare to get an absolute statement out of a scientist. But then to a layperson, like 95 percentile is pretty good. They pretty much think that that's 100%, right? That's more than a lot. But percentages, it's like it's hard for kind of a lot of people, even scientists, to think about that. 1% happens all the time. Play poker. Those one-outers happen all the time. I play video games where the drop chance is 1 in a million, and I have a lot of those items. So it's like it happens. But then when we speak to people, it's like, well, what is, and this is kind of the problem that you see when you get scientists on speaking about, like, is this weather event for climate change? Or it's like, well, we don't, this particular one, it's like, no, we don't know, but it's like in a larger trend, which is true. So in reality, the answer is really like, yeah, it is, but we can't say like a 1-to-1 correlation is not causation, right?
yeah, I mean, that's a good point. But like what you're saying, Nick, my perspective is that, in a college setting, you have students that are, I hate to say it, but they're like a blank slate. They're like fresh minds here to, like, they want to learn. But it may be that when you're dealing with like the 60-year-old farmer or the policymaker that has 25 years of experience, they immediately, and I can tell you as a fact, they immediately come into these situations like this. They're like, when they got the arms folded, they're immediately communicating that they're very skeptical of what you're going to say. And one of the guys on my PhD committee told an interesting story of like a scientist, a policymaker, and a religious person were on a panel to talk about climate change. And everybody looked to the religious person to give them the real deal. Like the scientists, they were like, I am already skeptical. Anything coming out of that person's mouth, I'm not sure I'm going to trust them. And for the religious person who has a connection, they trusted in the community, they have a relationship, they're more willing to listen to what they have to say and be willing to maybe change their mind. And so we scientists almost need to take that attitude that, like, when they come into a room, they're not here to do a lecture, because that may not necessarily be the best way of explaining the situation. You're here to build trust and to show that you care about the individual's interests, you care about their opinion, and that maybe over time those people will begin to trust you, and then you can maybe start, with that trust, you can start to open up doors to explaining why, in my example, why a farmer or a stakeholder might be interested in understanding more about the effects of climate change in terms of like the economic outcomes to them, that there may be ways of enhancing their economic productivity and still taking into account climatic changes and in a way that are good for the planet. So, but it's a very difficult thing, and I think again it takes trust and time before you can just kind of do that frontal assault.
Is Andrew? Well, now he's gonna play coy.
Yeah, well, it takes him a minute to get to the mute button, especially since he probably wasn't expecting a question.
I'm Yeah, I didn't even hear the question. I'm driving through a canyon, so you guys are cutting in and out, so I didn't even hear a question.
All right. No question directly to you. Just seeing if you have anything to say. Keep listening.
Let me get out of this canyon. Yeah, let me get out of this canyon first, and then I can give you some thoughts.
All right. Fair enough. So I have a couple questions. I loved the fact that you brought up the whole 1% thing, like the innumeracy, like our inability to critically think when it comes to probabilities, when it comes to percentages. All of those seem to, even myself, when it comes to probabilities, I'm horrible at it. I'll be the first to admit it. And if I still had to do statistics on like graph paper, with sum of squares, columns and stuff, I'd probably be horrible at it. Thank goodness for, GUI interfaces on statistical programs. What do you guys think, Justin and Greg, about scientific literacy, right? Like, or more appropriately, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it somewhat positively. The state of scientific literacy in the United States, right?
Like how well people understand it?
Well, do you think that if it were improved, that some of the problems with science communication on very topical scientific events like climate, like pandemics, things like that, like mental health, it would be easier to communicate the more complex ideas because we, again, to re-hit the theme, as scientists, we're super comfortable in these uncertain probabilities. That's the way that we talk. Like we're rarely super confident about things in the way that people like to hear people confident. Like, is it true or isn't? Is it going to happen or isn't going to happen? Is this the same as the last time it happened or isn't it? And we're like, that's such a difficult question to answer.
I think like this happens with math and science, is that we kind of take this historical like education model where we kind of have to like go through hundreds of years of like, this is what they believed then, like what is a cell, all the parts of a cell and all that kind of stuff. And then you get to the later parts of, maybe high school where then you're talking about like the central dogma of biology, of DNA to RNA to proteins and stuff like that. And it's like, I hate that model. I really hate the way that we teach science. I think that we should be funneling in and at the beginning, talking about the cool stuff that's happening in science. That's the interesting parts, the cool things that we're doing, because then it like lures people into like learn more. So like for example, like I went to UC San Diego in my genetics class, and like God, it was like 2010. That we were doing the stupid hierarchical charts and stuff. That is so dated. That idea of like Punnett squares and genetics nowadays. I mean, come on, man. With next generation sequencing, if you actually care about your sequence, you're just going to go and get it sequenced for $5,000 to $10,000, and then that's it. And then here we go. I go to a biotech company, and we're doing genetics. And how many times do you think we did a freaking Punnett square? Like, give me a break. No, we're doing next generation sequencing, man. We're like aligning millions of reads of DNA, and we're all getting them all aligned, figuring out whether or not a single change has happened on millions of reads and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, it looks more like computer science than it does genetics or Punnett squares or anything like that. It's completely different. And this has huge implications in our society, for example, people not like RNA, mRNA vaccine technology. Who knows about RNA nowadays? It's such a long time ago, and maybe it was in a passing kind of thing in school. Or look at lipid nanotechnology, lipid nanoparticles. That was 30 years ago. Nobody knows about that, but nanotechnology, I'm biased. I'm in a nanotechnology lab. Nanotechnology is one of the coolest fields that's out there, that's happening, like real science fiction stuff, but that's like actually happening. And yet nobody talks about it. The only mention of nanotechnology that you get is a Marvel movie where, Iron Man's new suit is like, oh, it's nanotechnology. It's like, and it has big implications for, obviously the pandemic and the vaccines, but then like practical stuff too, where it's like now we're identifying murderers and stuff through DNA technology, right? We're using PCR, polymerase chain reaction is a reaction that happens outside. Now we have to go through and literally, and if you're in a jury, they're going to be sitting there explaining to you what DNA is for 3 days before you can actually vote on whether or not this murder has been confirmed or not. So it's a huge thing in a democracy in order to have scientific literacy, and I think we've completely failed. And I think the underpinnings of it is just how we teach science. We don't teach the cool things that are happening. We teach this outdated historical model that just should be completely changed.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I would add, I guess, is I'm certainly I think that the number one thing from a political perspective that will improve the lives of our citizenry will be increased funding for education. That if we were able to, and again, this is a generational thing. We're not going to do it in 5 or 10 years, but increasing the funding and promoting education as a valuable commodity that will assist our society in many different ways needs to be stressed more. And similar to what I was saying about this unique approach to be able to communicate science in ways that develops trust and is not this, like Chris was saying, this frontal assault to shove it down people's throats, that it has to be a kind of a tag team of, at the same time, trying to increase literacy in science. So not that people will be educated on a particular topic, but that people start to understand the scientific process and what the time and effort that it takes for their phone to work and their electricity to work and the medicine that they're getting to work, that they understand that there is a extensive scientific consensus process that has led to the pill that they're taking to lower their blood pressure or their cholesterol, and that they apply that same mentality to these diffuse areas like vaccinations or climate change, things that are difficult topics to understand, that are multidisciplinary, that are diffuse, that are very hard to kind of put your finger on. I think that is a critical component. And the last thing I would mention to this is this facet I'm really interested in it is aspects of cognitive dissonance, of people that are part of tribes where the tribe is saying creationism is true, or vaccinations are toxic, or climate change is a conspiracy, where you're in a tribe that's saying that, but at the same time, those people are saying, well, wait a second, I went to school and I know this isn't right, but my friends everybody that I trust is saying it, so I have this divergence in my brain of like, what am I going to do? And oftentimes they're choosing to side with their tribe. So that is fascinating. It's fascinating scientifically to understand, and it's also fascinating to understand that issue so we can somehow address this, that I'm not in an ivory tower. I'm not getting paid off to do my research. I'm not falsifying my science, that I'm a person, I'm a scientist, I care about my community, and that I am a trustworthy figure. And look at the consensus around and the evidence of the things that you use every day. And I just think that if we do this tag team of showing that we are trustworthy and we're willing to develop this rapport and also increase our educational system and the methods to increase education for folks, that twofold approach over time will work wonders on these topics.
I mean, it's so true. Like, science is a way of thinking. A PhD is a philosophy degree, even the hard STEM stuff, it's like, it's how you're thinking about things, because it's not what it's not the total sum of all your information that because otherwise, how many PhDs does Google have, right? I mean, it's how you're thinking things through, how you're analyzing, like, what is a control? You know, how can you control for something? How would you, change everything but one parameter? And then what does that tell you? And
Right.
you can do that. You can be scientists. You can be scientists, that without getting a undergrad or a PhD degree. And it's important for people to be held up in that way, and to really push people to think about that, and to think about other sides of the argument. Scientists do that constantly. Like, the biggest critique of my thesis is me, so I'm constantly thinking about what's wrong, why is it not working, what could possibly be the thing that, what if this fails, what on that other side of the fence, what's going to tell me the most information about where I am now before the experiment, right? So it's like that's the idea and the thought process. And it's not a total sum of knowledge. I think that's the biggest mischaracterization of like a scientist.
Yep, I agree with that.
I have an interesting take on that.
Pray tell.
I don't think we have a science literacy problem in the United States. I think that it's true that there's a great degree of science ignorance in the United States. That isn't the problem, because you can explain science fairly easily. We have a problem of the ability to think critically. I agree that education is abysmal. They should be teaching philosophy at all grade levels, starting in kindergarten, and you should be getting a philosophy class every single level of every single year that you're in school. There needs to be a hell of a lot bigger focus on critical thinking, being able to determine, what things could be right, what things could be wrong.
That's exactly what I was going to say next. I love it. Steal my thunder, brother. Do it.
Well, because it's like your project with the Pacific. I'm from the Pacific Northwest too. I just drove through Idaho. I'm in Oregon now, but it's like I completely understand your issues talking to some of the local farmers. You look at farmers that have been doing this. I grew up with the ranchers. I grew up on a ranch. It's like they've been doing things certain ways, and the reason they do them that way is because they work. It's not like they're stuck in some old traditionalist methods. It's like they work, and they're not interested in your theories about what may hold true in the future. They're looking at what's working right now, and you come in and say, hey, we've got this issue coming up, and they're like, we don't care. This is how our process works now, and we're not particularly interested in your theories about tomorrow, because we have to make a living today. It completely understands the mindset behind it, and I think it's a failure of philosophical thinking. People aren't thinking that way. And there's also a touch of kind of that song, I looked around the world and saw that only stupid people are breeding. It's like, the average IQ is 100. The average hard scientist, PhD student, is a standard deviation above that. So what seems like it should be simple to you to understand, literally people that you're trying to describe it to can't wrap their mind around the concepts involved. And since they can't quite grasp the concept itself, it doesn't matter what you tell them, because it goes right over their head. It makes no real sense to them. It sounds like you're just talking out your ass, because the fundamental concept isn't ringing true. And to your point about you don't like to talk down to people, you don't like to dumb the science down, you like to give them the actual terminology. I being one of those layman people that is just casually interested in scientific topics and buys books to listen to learn when I'm interested. I'm a bit unique there. But even when somebody comes on, like I was listening to an interview with a astrophysicist, and they did kind of the same thing. That's like, I'm not going to talk down to you. And they went on, and they listed off so many different terms, and they described what they meant by those terms. The problem is I can't hold all of that in my head. By the end of that interview, I had no idea what this guy was even talking about, and I didn't have much interest in listening to him anymore because I wasn't getting anything out of it. It's like I got overwhelmed by the number of terminology that I was expected to instantly absorb and remember and understand, and you just can't do that. It's like you if you really want to talk to kind of the average person who doesn't really care about your field, they don't really care what you have to say because they're living their lives, and you're, especially when it comes to the climate field, you're talking about putting impositions upon them, and they really don't like that. So they're already not particularly interested in what you have to say. And the fact that they're ignorant of philosophy and critical thinking, that's very easy for them to just reject you outright. And when you come at them with a wall of terminology that they already don't really care to listen to, they just shut down and ignore you. So I do believe you have to dumb down science. It's annoying because I hate it when writers do it in their books. It's like, no, look, throw it at me because I have the time to actually research it. But you do have to do that to at least some extent. You can't overwhelm people, or they get sensory overload and they just shut down. You're not going to ever reach them that way, and then they don't have a desire to even listen to you going forward because they're like, "Wow, the guy's just speaking a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo, or expects me to know 3 million things that I've never even heard of, and don't particularly care about." So I'm not going to spend the time to try and even remember them. Sorry, I was trying to get all that out before I lost service again.
I love how you're more impassioned about it than the three of us combined.
Well, it annoys me because it's like I am not. I've been to some college, but most of my, I guess, knowledge especially about hard sciences, because I grew up in Lander, Wyoming, and the science programs there were incredibly basic. We didn't get to do all the really cool stuff, and we were probably 20 years behind the rest of the country. So I find something interesting. I went off on a tangent because somebody made some stupid argument about, scientists having traced mitochondrial DNA ancestry back to 6 original strains, and they tried to equate that to the 6 people on the ark. And I was like, wait, that can't be right. And I was about to start arguing on the internet because, somebody said something on the internet, so I had to get angry about it. But I had to stop for a moment going, the last time I learned anything about mitochondria was in high school 20 years ago. I had better probably do a little bit of research to make sure that what I'm saying hasn't changed and that I'm remembering it correctly, which led to like 2 weeks of me researching mitochondrial DNA and what we know about it and how we know about it, and the ancestral DNA, and learning about mitochondrial Eve. And I went through this whole thing just because it was somebody said something on the internet, and I went, wow, this is kind of interesting. I think I might be a little unusual in that. But then when I talk to other people, and I'm like, I care about fixing some of these problems. And this is, especially when it comes to climate change, is an issue that is dividing us, not bringing us together. We are not getting better at this. We're getting worse. And as time goes on, I'm having less and less confidence that we will be able to work together to fix any of it. Because it's going to, we're going to continue to polarize unless, something's got to give. And it really annoys me because this happens in all fields. Especially, I'm seeing it constantly, is a failure of critical thinking. I try to explain something to someone, and it seems fairly straightforward and obvious to me. It's like, look, I just listened to 3 different psychologists talk about these issues with people, and now you're telling me that I'm full of shit and don't know what I'm talking about. It's like, and that might be true because I didn't do the research, but I'm assuming that those 3 psychologists know what they're talking about, and that's what they said, and it makes sense to me. And they cannot get it through their head. They don't even realize, a lot of people don't even realize that they have a cognitive dissonance going on. They're perfectly fine. They've dismissed it. They have no idea how to think about things, how to think about problems. How do we fix this? And it's annoying because we get nowhere. And it's a huge failure in our educational system to not focus on philosophy. When I was much younger, I thought philosophy was kooky, had no interest in it, and would just dismiss anybody that started talking about philosophy. And now that I have learned a little bit more, I realized just how critically important philosophy is to our ability to comprehend higher concepts beyond our daily basic sustenance, getting by living. And yeah, it irritates me because I think that we're going to go through some pretty damn hard times, and a lot of people are going to suffer, and it's because we can't get the generalized population to engage their minds and actually think about it. It's like we have a hell of a lot of human intelligence potential out there to solve a lot of problems, and we can't do it because people won't engage their minds. And part of that is because of tribalism. We are very tribal, and I don't know how you break tribalism because it's encoded right into our DNA. So my rant's over about philosophy and people not thinking critically.
Well, I think. Thank you. That was good.
Listen, I'm just thrilled. I'm thrilled. I just want to make sure that 𝗏𝗧 recognizes that he's got it. It's philosophy, 𝗏𝗧. Philosophy is everything. I want to make sure that Christopher knows that, and especially Pat Lowinger that they both recognize. I think Zandring made a spectacular point. I'm sorry. What were you going to say there? It's a personal issue. It's just Maddie doesn't always appreciate philosophy quite as well as some of us think maybe he should. Greg, what were you going to say?
Well, I kind of got something to tie it in, and I'm really interested in Jason and your thoughts on this. I kind of have a good faith critique of how I feel like climate scientists have incorrectly framed this issue of climate change and everything. I have a problem basically with, and this goes with Chris's point of the deficit model, right? Where we are giving them, and we frame this entire climate change thing just by how I'm talking about it, climate change versus the negative impacts and ways that humans are impacting the environment and ecosystems around the world. And there's a lot of different ways that we are destroying nature. Humans, like, for example, 90% of wetlands have been destroyed in the last 50 years. And that likely has to just do with us wanting to live near the coast versus CO2 ppms directly. There's a huge mass extinction going on right now with 70% of animals that have died within the last 50 years. Animal populations are super low, and we've focused on this CO2 ppm thing, which, I agree, as a scientist, that it's intricately correlated with, and will cause extinctions, right? That's definitely true. The problem is that CO2 isn't like a face. You can't see it. You don't know that it's there. A lot of people don't even understand what a ppm is or even what CO2 is. So then we've kind of gotten ourselves ourselves into a corner where now we have to, through the deficit model, explain to them what, the positive feedback loops are, why that's a big problem, why that's going to actually impact ecosystems everywhere, and why everything's going to die. But the problem is we're already at that stage. We're already at the stage where everything is dying. So just I feel like what we can do is kind of frame the, instead of climate change, just look at all the ways that humans are impacting the environment and just let people kind of see, dead animals. Dead animals is very relatable. It's very easy to see that, man, isn't it kind of crazy that I go on a road trip from San Diego to Utah and I don't see any herbivores anywhere? Isn't that weird? It seems like we've kind of killed them all. And we've kind of they're not near the freeways, obviously, but I can see a pretty big, far away, when I'm going, and I don't see anything. That when I go to see streams and I don't see any amphibians, I don't see any insects. I see flies sometimes, but where are the birds? Where is everything? And I think that's just going to people's lived experiences and going to that and talking to that, because I think that's a lot easier to understand than a degree or two difference in global temperatures, which obviously is going to have a big impact and everything. I just want to preface that, but I think when people hear that, they think, okay, so I'm going to wear shorts instead of pants. It's kind of again, we have to deficit model our way out of it, and I feel like we need to go to people where they are, so they have to, so they don't have to learn these esoteric and even though they are real and they're happening, but that's a lot of different models that they have to kind of learn now, right?
Yeah, I totally would agree with you on that. That the issue of being able to identify these interconnected systems, these biological, atmospheric, oceanic, all these differing systems that are having that there is an effect which is resulting in reduction in species diversity, that we're seeing effects in environmental systems that have direct effects on humans. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a kind of a low-hanging fruit to be able to wake people up to the fact that we do have a system that is the feedback loop has shifted slightly, and that slight shift is resulting in what we're talking about. But I would make 2 points on what you were saying. One is that the interconnected nature of these systems are having a direct effect on us now. It's having an effect on humans as we speak, like what you're talking about, reduction in species is having an effect. like the reduction in certain types of ecosystems is having an effect on humanity right now. It's affecting how people live. It's affecting people's day-to-day activities. It's having a negative consequence on people's lifestyles, because if that's not happening, then people don't really care. But I would say that the issue of greenhouse gas emissions is the number one driver of climate change, which is the cause of all of these aspects. Now, it may not be, it's the number one cause. There may be other mitigating issues that are maybe exacerbating that, but increased greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere are causing a feedback loop where that shortwave radiation coming in, long-wave radiation is not escaping, and as a result, we're slowly increasing the temperature of the planet, and that is what's causing these dire situations. Oftentimes, not all of them, but oftentimes in terms of these ecological disasters, etc. So we have to be able to connect the dots. I understand it's like it may be some aspect of the deficit model, but we have to be able to provide some semblance of why this is happening. I think it's explaining why it's happening in a way that is understandable, and it also in a way that lets people kind of grasp the broad picture without having to get lost into the details. And in the same way that, like, for some reason, maybe people don't do this, but people tend to trust their doctors. They trust engineers. They're like, well, this person has an engineering degree. I think that they have an understanding how to build a bridge. I'm going to drive across the bridge. I'm not worried about the bridge collapsing because of all these things we know about engineering. But when it comes to these topics, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Xandring?
Yeah, because I think you're completely wrong on the.
Okay.
People
please,
trust.
Tell me why.
People trust other people that they have a relationship with and they can relate to. People don't drive across bridges because they think, well, the engineers know what they're doing. They should be able to make a bridge that doesn't fall down. The reason people will drive across bridges is because they don't fall down. After the I-35 bridge fell down in Minneapolis, people half the number of people driving across the bridge, even after they fixed it and they explained why it fell down, half the people still won't go across it, and it has created huge traffic issues in across other bridges because they don't trust the bridge is going to stay up. So yeah, I'm just pointing out that it's like people tend to, or at least in my opinion, people tend to believe people that they have personal relationships with, and not so much just the quote unquote experts out there. And more it's even becoming a pejorative to call somebody an expert on something.
I think you would, maybe a better way of framing it, in my perspective, would be that they have a priori evidence. They have evidence that that the bridges don't fall down, and that engineers have experience in building bridges. And then similarly, I like to think that climate scientists have a good track record of showing that the evidence that they have been providing in all the thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed publications similarly can be supported and show that what they're saying is actually true. So I would agree with you that people just don't do it because they maybe think that engineers know what they're doing. They combine that with what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and they make these conclusions. But for some reason, in topics that are, like I say, diffuse topics that are hard for people to connect the dots. When you say the climate is changing, they say that's the weather. The weather changes all the time.
Exactly.
So they are not able to maybe make that connection, and that inability to communicate those things, I think, falls onto the scientific community, that they're not doing the appropriate things they need to do to communicate and to work with the public in a manner that they can understand that. So
yeah, I think you're right. Like the what you're talking about, where it's like scientists, I feel like the carte blanche default position is like, what do you mean? We have all the work. Look at the bookshelf of all the publications that we have. What do you mean? This is what it is. But I think what the public hears is nothing because they haven't looked and read any of that. And that's kind of like the frustrating. Yeah. And that's the problem with like the IPCC report. Man, dude, the sixth assessment had some amazing figures in it. After like the first, 3 that are the doomer CO2 stuff, which is, by the way, I just want to say, like, internationally and nationally, I do think that the focus should be on CO2, obviously, because those are the international problems and stuff. Like, you kind of have to have regulations. But I'm just saying, it's interesting for me on the last 2 figures. You had the second to last one, which is talking about all the technologies, how cheap they are and looking at the cost effectiveness and how much they can reduce emissions. And it was an incredible graph, talking about really showcasing solar and wind versus all the other energy parts. But then you had another one, another graph, the last one, which is my favorite graph or data table, I don't know how you want to put it, that IPCC has ever done. And it shows how all of those climate mitigation steps align with sustainability goals. So for example, you had gender equality on there, and you would think, how would gender equality actually impact electrification? Actually, there's a really strong correlation, because women, when they get into places of equal power and when they have gender equality movements and they start getting into governments, that's the number one thing that they're investing in. Well, one of the priorities is public infrastructure and electrification and all this stuff, because women spend a disordinate amount of time, more than men, on public roads, public transportation. So we see, globally, that, gender equality is tied to electrification of a lot of these power grids. But nobody can see that. When you go, when I was linking it, President Sunday was doing this deep dive into, climate research and all this kind of stuff. And I linked it to him, and I was like, dude, check these out. These are great. And I even linked the specific figures, and I was like, this is really good. And no offense to him. We just talked about it yesterday, by the way. It was a good discussion. But I think he shares the same feeling that, I can't understand this. And we, Jason, we both know that science, the figures nowadays are more like a steak dinner rather than like a little treat. There's these big chewy figures that are just, they're almost like a publication in and of itself. We're talking like 5 or 6 different things all in there, and it's a lot of information. It's nice for me. I love those type of figures, but for most people, especially when we're talking about science communication, they're just like, I don't even know. Where's the bar graph? Where is the bar?
And here's another problem that you're running into. Because you can talk, like President Sunday's a pretty intelligent person, so
exactly.
It's like you can at least get them to listen, and you can say, okay, well, show me this in a more simple manner that's easy to absorb, and I can go on. Okay, but that's not who you're trying to really. That's somebody you can convince of your position with data and evidence. But we're talking about how to, if we actually want to address climate change, then there needs to be, the average person needs to care enough about it. And this is a global problem. And of course, until you get the country's GDP above a certain, I can't remember the exact number, the population does not give a damn about you can tell them that the climate's going to end in 50 years and that they don't care. They will look you straight in the eye and say, bugger off, fuck off. I'm trying to survive here. It's like, you are not going to take away this shit from me, because I don't give a shit about what's going to happen tomorrow. I care about feeding my kids today. So one of the things that needs to happen, because this is a global problem, are in the poorer areas, we need to get the economic prosperity up, because as economic prosperity goes up, people actually start to then begin to care about the environment. But until that happens, you're never going to convince them, so they're never going to support you. And then when you move into the first world countries, you have a huge problem with conflicting reports. Because you'll come out with a whole bunch of things that you just listed, and it's like, wow, why, if I just listen to you, there's absolutely no reason. It sounds all really, really good. We'll talk about electric, talk about wind, these green energy projects. And then you go and you listen to an actual presentation where they break down, talking about statistics and numbers. I'm interested in those too. And when you look down at exactly how much CO2 is emitted to build and operate one wind turbine, and you realize that the amount of energy that you're offsetting, you have a deficit of CO2. It costs more in CO2 to build a windmill than the energy that we get, than we're saving. Why are we doing that? The only reason we have windmills and solar farms is because they're heavily government subsidized. They're not economically viable. So you'll see a very well presentation, a very well put together presentation that gives all of the breakdown of exactly the materials that go in this, and the fact that it's like, okay, well, now what do we do with these? We have fields of wind turbine blades, that aren't going to break down for a couple 100,000 years, that are just sitting buried in the ground now. What do we do with those? We have, there's heavy metals and other toxic chemicals inside of solar panels. California is now having a huge issue that they're observing with waste solar panels because they're just burying them. They don't, it costs too much to recycle them. They don't get enough economically out of it. So when you have all of these competing interests and they come out and they say, this is for first world specifically, and it's like, look, we don't have a good solution to any of this stuff. All of these things, all of these proposals, they're going to negatively impact you in ways, talking about, like a cap and trade system. It's like, look, all these things are going to harm the economy. Look at the amount of harm that has been done to the economy just up to this point from COVID, from 2020 to today, and how many people are pissed off. Look at the approval ratings for Joe Biden from when he took office to today, and I think that a hell of a lot of that loss of approval rating has been because of the economy. People are crying and just raging all over the internet about paying $5 for a gallon of gas. I'm paying almost $7 for a gallon of diesel in some places. Those things are harming people immediately, and that's all they care about. Unfortunately, we are human beings as a generalized species are incredibly bad at looking forward, recognizing problems, and then mitigating those problems. What we are really good at is adapting to the problem after it happens. So you have a really hard time holding people's attention because there's two disparate views out there where you say, hey, we should be investing in green energy, and somebody comes out and says, yeah, that green energy isn't really all that green. There isn't enough lithium on Earth in order to build enough electric cars, the batteries to drive enough electric cars for every person to own an electric car. That clearly isn't a solution. So you have a whole bunch of these things batting back and forth, and especially at least in the first world nations, and the U.S. in particular, you have people that are going, I don't know what to believe because these people sound credible, and there isn't an actual solution here, and the things you're trying to do to me are causing me harm in the here and now, making my life difficult right now, and I don't support that. So, I think that if you want to try and move people's opinions and communicate to them, you need to show them how this thing is going to benefit them, and not just hurt them. I don't know how cogent I was in all of that.
Well,
I just stopped and had to park while doing that.
Well, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. Let me start with sort of I think the most recent one, which is okay.
I want to throw a wall of words at you and make you deal with it so that I can finish parking the truck and not have to talk anymore.
Yeah, well, we're just gonna listen. I was writing all that down. I got a list. We're just gonna go from A to Z.
Okay.
I'll start backwards, and with the most recent one, I do think how to make it so that you the two big takeaways for me on that I want to ask you guys about. The first is, okay, how do you make it immediate for people? Because I think he's got a point. If it's not immediate for me, and if all I really see is the downside, I was like, well, wait a minute, is my grocery bill going to be higher if I'm trying to fix the environment? Right? Why do I want to fix? So I think there's a very good point there, which is people often see the downside. So how do you make it more immediate so that they're interested in engaging and hearing? And then the other thing is, how do you deal with people who are quote educating from the other side, or we keep thinking or hearing that scientists are saying conflicting things. Eggs are good for you, then they're bad for you. Wine is good for you, then it's bad for you. Is that part of science education and having better fluency in that, or is that another problem? How do we deal with that?
I mean, I think that the problem with at the end of the day, because of at the end of the day, people aren't moved to action because talking about this subject is very doomer, right? It brings out everyone's nihilist and pessimistic views. Everyone, especially on the internet, you can't be doomer enough. And if you're super, super doomer, you get more views about it. So there isn't really a call to action. And I feel like the focus on CO2 ppms we're not educating people that in ways to actually fix the problem. We're just creating and highlighting a key essential problem, but the problem is that we're also not highlighting the road forward. So, for example, so for me, I mean, we should be talking about and how to motivate people to actually make a big change in their natural spaces locally to them. So like, for example, every city has a climate action plan. What is your city's climate action plan? What are they doing? My city just got a big grant and we're doing a bunch of renewable, infrastructure stuff and development there. You can go to city hall meetings. You can actually make good questions about this. Ask about it. Or if you don't want to do that, there's also boards and commissions that you can join that make a big difference in this stuff. They're unelected positions. If you email your city council member, you can get involved. And, for example, the zoning commissions have a huge impact on, like, for example, where parking lots go. So parking lots will sometimes bisect natural spaces. So now you have natural spaces, an island of natural space after natural space. It's basically an archipelago of nature. And we need to have those connected if we want a lot of different species and a lot of different animals, going forward. At the state level, that's where we see drastic differences in sustainable practices. For example, I mean, if you look at California and the amount of non-carbon sources that they use versus other states, I mean, we're talking the difference between California is about 63 non-carbon versus the rest of the United States is about 19%. So it's a lot of states are just dragging their heels on this stuff. In my opinion, the EPA ruling that did give a cap and trade system so that power plants that were more dirty, giving off more emissions, were able to trade their credits back and forth to better, more sustainable practices was a good thing. And I think that SCOTUS decision, hindered our ways going forward.
Jason, any thoughts? Are you muted?
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry. You can hear me, can't you?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can.
Okay.
We can now, but it wouldn't be in time if somebody wasn't muted. So you've learned from the master, obviously.
Of course, I didn't have. I've learned well from Nick to have myself muted. So I think what you're saying is very well put. I think that there are a combination of local and corporate methods that can help on these types of problems. I certainly am in favor of kind of the local, like you as a person can make a change, and that the local community, you can make a change. But I would emphasize the issue of corporate responsibility. Corporations have a huge effect, as we know, on the increase of greenhouse gas emissions, and that we need to hold corporations responsible. And I think that the best thing that we can do as citizens is evaluate how we're going to spend our money. Making personal changes to recycling or going to your city council is important, but I think that making decisions with your pocketbook have huge effect, as we know, on corporations recognize that, and we've seen changes over the last 10, 15 years in those areas. One thing I want to mention is Xandring made a comment about wind turbines and the deficit, the carbon deficit. And I just want to mention that I think there are a number of studies that would suggest, one in particular that I can post, that did a very extensive analysis of this, of the manufacturing, of the breakdown of old turbines, of the maintenance, of the nacelle production. Their assessment is that the carbon payback curves at around 9 months for a 1 to 2 megawatt wind turbine. So that's pretty damn good for a turbine that's going to be around for 10, 15 years. So while I would agree that we need to study these kinds of things, I want to look to actual peer-reviewed papers that evaluate these kinds of topics. So I think that those are important subjects to think about, but I just want to make sure that we have the right information on that.
I can agree. Yeah, the IPCC report says the same thing.
I want to I want to point out that I'm not specifically quoting any any studies. I'm quoting what the people are talking about. The average person. I saw an entire presentation from an engineer that went through and said, look, this is all of the materials that go into it. There's this much steel. This is the process for making steel. This is how much CO2 is emitted. And he went through every single step for every single piece of material in the entire production of all of the materials in there, and was like, and then just did math. And it's like any regular person watching that is going to come away not believing you or either of you. Period. You're going to say there's a really good peer-reviewed study on this. They're going to say, don't care. It was laid out in black and white math right there. Very easy to understand. You're simply wrong. Well, and I'm not going to bother go reading, these. Go search down and possibly have to pay to get a research paper that shows the other another view of it. They're not going to do that.
Well, yeah, I agree. It's just going to be cheaper in the end, and it's just economically, it's kind of like fracking, where fracking is just cheaper than coal. It just is. And those type of methods are just going to be cheaper. And I mean, the cost of those materials over time, the IPCC 6th assessment has a really good graph where it's just dropping, logarithmically right now, just the cost of those things. So I don't know what numbers they're using, that could have been like 10-year-old numbers or something like that. And he was computing in how much it's being used today, that kind of thing. I guess I'm skeptical of anything, but at the IPCC level is usually pretty good. It's thousands of authors.
Right, and I'm not saying he very well probably was taking the absolute worst. Like this is a coal-fired plant that's powering everything that's doing. I mean, I'm sure he took the worst. I can look at it and say, okay, I need to see where you're getting these numbers from, but the average person isn't. That's my point. The only reason I bring it up is I'm not trying to tell you that this is true. I'm telling you that there are very well put together presentations that break things down in a very simplistic way, probably overly simplistic. That the average person, when you read all the comments, it's like the average person buys into that right now. And you saying, well, there's IPCC study, and their eyes glaze over, and they're like, I don't care. Yeah. I don't even know what that is. I'm not going to go look for it. I probably have to pay for it if I do look for it to get it. And then how am I even going to understand what's written there? Because most scientific peer-reviewed studies are not easily understood by the layman.
Well,
that's the deficit you have to overcome.
So, and it's not just so. Here's an interesting point, which is, and I think he said something which I think most of us agreed with, which is people will hear this guy giving a what feels like a scientific presentation, what seems like good numbers, and they will hear that and they'll believe him, and they won't believe somebody else who maybe has researched this a ton more and actually understands it a bit better. And it seems to me that one of the reasons is because we're more likely to believe what we want to hear. So is the problem the scientific numbers, and is the problem the presentation, or is it in this case that we're whether or not it's feeding the biases we already have, or not just biases. Let me rephrase that. I mean, it's like I would rather hear a scientist come on and say, windmills aren't going to solve the problem, guys, so let's not even bother trying. I want to hear that, right? Because then that means I don't have to do anything. So when somebody comes on and says, here's all the math and here's all the numbers and here's all the reasons why it's not going to work and it's not really that big a deal, the numbers and math don't turn me off at that point, right? Because I've already bought into, I have some reason to buy into what he's saying, whether it's true or not. When a scientist comes in and says, well, here's the hard reality of it, and if they try the same technique, it's not going to work. Does that seem fair? Am I off base? And is that a problem? And if so, how do we address it? I'll start with Jason, because I think Jason's been sort of talking about, with any luck, he's muted again, so that it could be twice in the stream. And no, crap.
Right. No, I'm not muted. Okay. Excellent points by 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿 and 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥. That the issue of, and this gets to the heart of this scientific communication aspect, which is when we have a world that learns off of Facebook posts and Twitter feeds and, the 2-minute YouTube video that I watched from somebody that I don't know where that came from, but it strikes true to me that it might have some like ulterior motives of like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I want to believe this more. Like competing against that, like scientists trying to compete against well-polished, I don't want to say propaganda pieces, but pieces that somebody puts out on Facebook that goes viral is a real challenge. And I'm not necessarily sure that I have the answer to that. I mean, when somebody puts out something and says, hey guys, I've done the math on this, look at this, this, and this, guess what? Wind turbines, not worth it. That's a problem. I have
the answer.
What's the answer?
The answer is to start teaching kindergartners philosophy and critical thinking and teach them every year until they graduate. That's the answer. And I have a feeling that we aren't solving these problems until that happens.
I think that that's part of the answer, but I think that the problem is that I'm not sure that we have the political and economic will to educate everybody to a level where they can spot these kinds of false bits of information. And can we stay ahead of the curve? Because the curve is changing as we speak, of the ability to communicate misinformation in ways that convinces people to rile them up into a tribe to be able to riot against the powers that be. How dare you climate scientists try to take this money away from us? I think that is a real challenge. So I agree. It is the educational process. Maybe it is teaching critical thinking in a better capacity at younger ages, but it's also maybe even addressing the heart of some of these problems of misinformation, preventing that from happening. That's a whole other problem that I'm not sure how feasible it is or not. It runs up against First Amendment rights and freedom of expression. And so I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but it's a big problem.
Well, and let me say, I mean, Xandring is speaking exactly to one of my biggest complaints. But I would like to focus specifically because neither of you are politicians, and neither of you are going to be going in that area. And I want to make sure that we try to focus on specifically as communicators who are communicating science. What is it that you gentlemen can do, and how does it affect that? Because while I think Xandring is right, I think I want to try to keep the scope closer to what works for the two of you who were smarter than the rest of us who decided to get into politics.
Well, that's a great point. I can talk to my personal experience. I mean, please. I'm trying as a science communicator. I mean, this is something that I'm figuring out. Like, what do I do? Maybe this is therapy. I don't know. They'll help me. I mean, I have a big problem. Like, for example, like, how long are my videos? Like stuff like this, where it's like, I'm a scientist. I want people to watch them. I want like a more nuanced, higher level. I want to raise the level of science discourse on the internet. And, I think that it's better, to have an uncut, a conversation, but at the same time, people aren't going to pick, and click on a 3-hour conversation about, the IPCC report. So what do I do? As an editor, I actually have a lot of pull on like what parts do I cut out? What parts do I leave in? That little like 1-minute intro on the 3-hour thing, I can actually bait that and make myself look real good and that other person look real bad, and it's kind of, it's tough. Like what I've kind of figured out over the last like year and a half of having my channel is that people basically will watch between 10 and 13 minutes at most on a really good video. So what I kind of do is I'll have like a longer video that's uncut that people can look at, and click on. It's unlisted, so it doesn't show up in my channel, because I've sent people my channel before and they're like, dang dude, like 2-hour videos, nobody has time for that. And I'm like, well, no, there's shorter videos in there, you just gotta look now. And people are like, no, I don't. So they automatically are like, no, I'm okay. And so I kind of decided that I'm gonna unlist the longer videos. I'm gonna, like this one, I'll probably like, cut it up based off of the question. But I want to be fair to people that have and speak to this. And it is very interesting though, as a science communicator. I have videos that are so cool that are about we cured genetic blindness with the nanoparticles that are coated in different localizing peptides and all that kind of stuff. And it's amazing stuff that I love. That's some of my worst performing videos, but that people don't really watch that, compared to like debates and opposing ideas and that kind of thing. So, for example, my best video is basically, I'm debating a communist about lysenkoism.
Yeah.
Whether or not DNA is the basis of heredity. And my second popular one is an anti-vaxxer that I'm talking to. So it's like, maybe as scientists, maybe we have to go out of this lecture mode, kind of like what Jason was talking about, and kind of just talk to people and just kind of establish that trust. And I'm actually involved in a lot of anti-vax communities online. Like I'll post anonymously and stuff like that. And the aim isn't to change their minds, but when they say this NWO conspiracy that all the scientists and all the labs and all the world are all concocted together, and I'm like, dude, but I'm in a lab. Like, do you think that I'm doing this? And he's like, no, you're one of the good ones. And it's like, okay, well, there's one person that knows one scientist. That's progress for me.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of feedback if you're interested about
I'd love
some of
it.
your because we've had you on this channel, and I found incredibly fascinating was the first time you came on to talk about algae. Talking about building biodiesel out of algae and the fact that it is more or less carbon neutral. It's like you're not pulling carbon out of the ground and putting it into the air. You're pulling carbon out of the air, then you burn it and you put it back in the air. So it's not really solving anything, but it is at least not contributing to the problem. I thought that was a very, very fascinating show. I learned a hell of a lot. It was very interesting, and it was awesome. But even in that show, you strayed into areas and started talking about things because you were excited about it and you wanted to share, where I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I would say that I have a better understanding of science and scientific principles than the average person does. I know that sounds conceited, but I believe that to be true. And if I can't follow you, and you move off into someplace, or you'll say something, I'm like, okay, well, I actually do know what that is, but the only reason I know what that is because I read a book that covered part of that. So it's like, okay, I understand this acronym. But I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about. When you're talking, as far as trying to communicate science, I guess you got to try and decide, what do you want to do? Are you targeting the people that are like me, that are slightly above average, probably a slightly above average insofar as their interest level, not just IQ or their ability to look things up or comprehend scientific principles, or just their ability to comprehend principles at all? Or are you looking at the average American who doesn't, it's not that they necessarily can't do all of those things, but they don't have an interest in doing any of those things. So which one of those do you want to target? And I would say that if you're trying to target the majority of the population, which isn't going to put the effort in that I would, and doesn't particularly care, their lives are full, they're living their lives, they have stuff to do, they're not going to take their time out to look at any of this stuff. So if that's who you're targeting, then you want to get rid of acronyms. You don't want to go off on, you don't want to give them a wall of specific jargon or terminology, because you're going to lose them really fast, and they're not going to go look. They're not going to spend the time to do that. It's like and if you have to spend too long trying to explain just the terminology you're using so that they can understand what the point you're trying to make, you lose them in 30 seconds.
And what what I'm going to do is we're starting to run a little late, and there was a couple of points I wanted to hit. So rather than get into,
I'll shut up now. I wanted to just listen anyway.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Well, I have a scientific question for Jason before we end.
Okay, we'll do that. And I have a couple of other comments I want to make sure I don't miss. I get a little nervous when we start criticizing like individuals' performances, because I was like, have you guys watched this show? I mean, because like when you see the shit that I screw up, I'm like, I can barely. We're lucky when this thing actually runs. So I just like, at least it's yeah. Let's. I get nervous when we start talking about performance for any individual show. So I did. We had a couple of things that I know 𝗲𝗍𝐸 wanted to talk about. He had to bounce, so we have lost him. But a couple of things he had mentioned earlier: the Oxford Handbook of Science. Jesus, I really wish he had picked easier.
Of science communication.
Bingo. That's it. And that is in, he mentioned that one earlier, but a couple of other ones. How to Have Impossible Conversations, a very practical guide, how to change, how minds change. And another one, and I want to talk about this one briefly in part because it's the only one I know anything about. I'll pretend like I'm an expert in the others, but really the only one I know anything about is A Manual for Creating Atheists. And I think the reason he included that, I haven't talked to him about it, so this is speculation. But the reason is because this has to do with the Socratic method, essentially, which is when we've talked about this on this channel before. We've talked about, what is it? Oh dear Lord, the method that sort of came from this. I don't know why my brain is, but it's essentially a form of the Socratic method. So instead of saying this is where you're wrong, instead of talking about the deficit model, talking about
You're talking about street epistemology?
Yes, thank you. Street epistemology. That is what I'm talking. Thank you. So asking people questions and getting them to try to research their own answers in one way or another, and to see you as an avenue maybe to that if they have questions, but letting them explore it. So I think that's why he included that, and we weren't able to get to that, but we're starting to get a little tight on time, and again, 𝗲𝗍𝐸 had to bounce. So those are a couple of things to look at. I did have, I'm gonna forget, so I'll actually do this now. I was gonna save this to the end of the show, but Greg, you host a channel called The Peer Review. You have on a lot of scientists. This man here, Jason, I think would be spectacular, and I hope the two of you will be able to connect after the show. I will put the two of you in touch. That'd be great. But it is that's definitely something I will get in touch with you. In fact, you may remember, Greg, that before when you were going to first come on and we're talking about solutions to climate change, we were going to have a episode on climate change. It was because I was trying to organize it on Discord, and Jason is smart enough to avoid Discord.
Is this it?
Oh no, he's not a doomer guy, but he was no. But he was. We were going to have him on to. We were going to try to do dual shows.
Discord.
And it was entirely my. It was a production problem. That's why we blame Neil 604 Atheist, not me. He's Canadian. So at any rate, but I hope the two of you can get in touch, and anything I can do to facilitate that. And Jason, we would like to have you back on. I'm going to ask you a question, Jason, just vis-a-vis a sort of an example of what we've been talking about. And it's a serious question. It's not going to sound serious. I'm asking you seriously. And then just a couple things to wrap up. And I want to get your guys' final thoughts. Jason, I am a theist. I'm talking to you. You're a scientist. You're going to educate me. And I want to ask you a question, Jason. This is a serious question I'm asking. I can't believe I'm going to ask this, but I am asking. So you are a science communicator, and somebody hits you with this question. Well, gee, if evolution is real, why are there still monkeys? You've been hit with this. I know you've been hit with this before. I've been hit with this before. This is, this can be the aggravating one, right? So now this is not an online forum.
Why are you asking me this question? I'm not a biologist. I have to ask the evolutionary theory and why.
I could ask each of you. I could ask each of you, but I know you've been asked this question before. I know you get asked this question. Now you get asked in forums where people just want the blood sport, right? But they want to. So we're talking about science communication. Somebody says this to you. Any thoughts on how? I'll ask each of you. Actually, I'll start with you. But somebody asks you a question like that. How do you think maybe as a communicator to try to approach that?
Well, I mean, if we're in a confrontational perspective, then I'm going to take a totally different view than if we're actually in a, if I was a biologist and they are asking these questions, and we're in a capacity where we're not here to show somebody how that they don't understand something. You want to entice them to consider the options. I would say something to the effect that that the mass of evolutionary biology work with thousands and thousands of scientists have worked on these topics related to natural selection and genetic mutations. And the reality is that we know for a fact that animals that are derived from other animals can coexist at the same time, that there's not a problem with that. And that if we don't want to have to get into the nitty-gritty science details, but the reality is that we can go and look at a number of studies that show why that's the case. Now, I could also maybe I could try to take a biblical perspective, like that might be another angle, which is to say, from a theist perspective, why couldn't the world exist in that manner? That to have the evolutionary theory exist, that God created the world in such a way as that evolution created the world as we see it. There's not a conflict between you being religious and the science being valid. If God exists and God is all-powerful, all-knowing, then he has the capacity to construct the world in a way that that science is factual. And the last thing I would say to that is that God gave me a brain. God, there's a quote, I think, by Galileo that says, I don't believe in a God that gave me intelligence and rational thought and intended us to forego their use. So it may be that the theist perspective might be a better approach, and it's kind of thinking about my thoughts on that, than trying to take the approach of, well, science says it's that way. So maybe putting yourself in the shoes of the theist and try to answer the question as if you were them.
All right, and so I'm going to ask you, Greg, same question. So that's a common one that a lot of us get. You're a communicator.
Yeah.
Someone's come up to you and said, "Well, gee, if evolution's true, why are there still monkeys?"
Yeah, I mean, I actually am a huge practicer of the Socratic method. I love it. I love asking questions because it's like it allows me to kind of learn, and hopefully, the idea when you're talking to someone, I feel like, isn't to have them change their mind in the conversation. I think that's kind of like the biggest problem and misconception that that people will have this epiphany, and you kind of don't want that, because then in the next conversation they're going to have their minds changed instantly with whoever they're talking to too. So it's kind of like, critical thinking. You're trying to think, why and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, the answer is basically the same reason why bacteria still exists, even though yeast evolved or eukaryotes evolved, right? Is basically evolution happens in groups, and speciation happens when those groups are separated. So apes can still exist, even though humans still exist, and we're still as evolved as both of us are as evolved as the other. Humans aren't on this pyramid of evolution or a step ladder where everything evolves into a human. Actually, bacteria are just as evolved as we are. Everything, stuff like that.
All right. Sounds like a good answer. Now I want to make sure everybody gets a final thought.
Do I get to answer?
I tell you what, absolutely. I also want to make sure that Greg.
I'm just curious. I was originally here just to listen to it. If you're going to ask me that question, I do have an answer, and it's short.
Okay. Hit us with your answer.
I'm not a science communicator. You're an idiot. Go learn biology.
Okay. For those of you who have joined in time to learn about science communication, I have to say, In Time does not completely endorse all of the views by everybody in terms of effective science communication on the dais today. We'll let you guys figure out what works and what doesn't. I wouldn't recommend saying that. At least as a science communicator, I say that kind of shit all the time, but it's because I have a short fuse. All right, Greg. So what was the question you wanted to ask Jason?
Yeah, but one last thing on religion. We actually had someone was a sociologist that studied religions and the different types of religions' beliefs on climate change, and it's actually drastically different by religion. So I kind of I felt like religion was kind of more dangerous, prior to that conversation. It's really interesting. Basically, evangelicals in the United States are specifically denying science when a lot of other religions do not. So it's just kind of an interesting side note. I guess
it's in the U.S. It doesn't actually so much in other countries as well. It's really the U.S. that seems to have an issue with it. But please continue.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, I don't. I would love to talk to you again, but I would love to answer this question. I guess my background is biology. I'm an ecology undergrad, so that's kind of like how I frame how humans are negatively impacting the environment, Jason. So I would love your ideas on how I could think about this better. But basically, I'm scared that we are going to lose out on all of these organisms and they're going to die. And this is called the genetic bottleneck effect, where basically we lose out on all the diversity within their genomes, and that causes that causes extinction events, in and of itself. And I feel like we don't have enough sequencing to even know what the genetic mutation are in the populations are. We don't. And we can't, even if we have perfect sequencing of all the living organisms in the world, I feel like we have no way to restore ecosystems. We can barely even restore, a mammoth, right? That's kind of like the whole thing, bringing back a mammoth. So the idea that we're going to bring back communities of bacteria, communities of butterflies, and all this kind of thing, or insects and amphibians and all that kind of stuff, it just seems so outlandish to me, and I don't think that could really ever happen. That's the same reason why, by the way, we can't really terraform Mars. And the idea that we're going to create these ecosystems, out of nothing, is just kind of crazy. So in my mind, I feel like I am more scared of losing out on all those organisms and destroying the ecosystem. Like CO2 ppm seems like a more tangible problem to me, where you could create geoengineering solutions to try to pull down extra CO2 from the atmosphere. You could seed the oceans with iron. You could create other ways. And I'm not saying that they're easy, right? Obviously, we would already be doing those. And on top of that, CO2 does have cascading effects on, a lot of different processes too, right? But I feel like I'm less scared of CO2 ppm versus the death of the environment. But maybe they're not completely two different things,
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I would not think of them as these mutually exclusive systems, because the effects of greenhouse gas emissions are a driving force for what's going on with species diversity and the problems that you're seeing. Now, again, I mentioned before that it's not the only thing, but it's a driving force. When we change temperatures and we increase the amount of heat that the planet is retaining, we know for a fact that when that happens over long periods of time, that those slight changes change ecosystems dramatically, and those changes of those ecosystems are having the effects of red coral dying out, or like you were saying, the number of species that have gone extinct over the last 50 to 70 years has gone up tremendously. And so I would not think of them as these disconnected aspects. I mean, I understand the interests of the final outcome is what you're talking about is horrible, and it's something that somebody can grasp onto. But I think that we want to be able to connect the dots to say, what is the cause of this? Oftentimes we say that anthropogenic climate change, man-made climate change, is happening. It's having an effect right now, a detrimental effect right now. So we need to somehow communicate that the causes of climate change are man-made, that they are caused by primarily greenhouse gas emissions, and it's a driving force to what the things that you're seeing. So if you want to try to affect change in those areas from a climate scientist perspective, then we need to come up with either adaptation or mitigation issues to address that. And the adaptation, while I agree, the geoengineering, those types of things are viable, the number one way is to not put it into the atmosphere. And so, we know that when they talk about tipping points, are we at a tipping point? Have we passed a tipping point? Lots of folks have said we've already passed a point of no return at this point. But My particular position is there's always time to try to make change. I don't want to try to communicate that it's hopeless. It's not hopeless, and ecosystems can revive themselves. Ecosystems are very robust, and I know some species are dying off, but I think that I just think that the way to address that question is to not separate the issue that you're talking about from the core reasonings around why that's happening.
I'd also
go ahead.
Well, no, Xander had made a point once that I liked very much that I'd like to reiterate. It's his point, but I'd like to steal it. Reiterate it, which is that the other thing is, I think even if it were to appear hopeless for one reason or another, the truth is human ingenuity is a staggering thing. And the reality is the more time that we can buy ourselves and the easier we can make our lives so that we can focus on things like this instead of, trying to, recover from the damage, the more we can sit there and not be spending time on trying to combat the rising sea levels, but instead trying to figure out how to reverse this damage. The more we can improve our own lives, usually the better we can spend on, the more time we can spend on education, the more manpower we have to overcome problems like this. So even if we don't see necessarily a solution immediately in the future, there have been many times in the course of history where we have not seen a solution, and we go forward and we try. When Kennedy said we're going to land a man on the moon, everybody thought he was crazy, and there was absolutely no way of doing it until we did it. Yes, Jason, what were we going to say?
Okay, I just want to, this is very quickly, Nick, because somebody was mentioning in the chat, it's like Daryl Frost was saying that he'd still like an answer on how CO2 creates warming. We're often told that it does. What's the mechanism? So I'm just going to give like the 35-second, 45-second answer is that there's what's called shortwave radiation and longwave radiation. Shortwave radiation is what the sun gives off. The sun gives off shortwave radiation. It goes through the atmosphere. It hits the atmosphere. Some of it reflects back. Some of it hits the earth. When it hits the earth absorbs that heat. And when that heat is absorbed and then re-radiated, that re-radiation is called longwave radiation. It's radiation with a longer wavelength. That longwave radiation, that wavelength, just happens to be at the wavelength where CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions collect in the atmosphere. So what ends up happening is the solar radiation can come through, but when that long-wave radiation is emitted, it just happens to be at the wavelength where CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions are. And those CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions block that energy from escaping. And that happens over long periods of time. Then we slowly start to change the amount of heat on the earth, and that system, which has been in balance, gets out of balance. And this is kind of the whole aspect with climate science, is that it's about these feedback loops, these feedback systems. When you get the ship going in a certain direction and then you slowly start to change it, it starts to become impossible to shift it back in that direction without a lot of effort. So that's kind of the short answer of
Jason.
A great example of that feedback loop is when the glaciers are melting, and then the glaciers, since they're white, they're not able to bounce a lot of that energy off, and now the Earth is actually absorbing that heat and getting it hotter, and it's just
getting hot. That's right. That's exactly right. And sometimes people talk also about a theory called snowball Earth theory. If the Earth gets covered in snow, how can it ever get out of it, given the fact that all the sun, the radiation is being reflected off, there's no heat being absorbed? And the answer is chemical weathering and greenhouse gas emissions due to things like volcanoes, etc. And we've had this happen in the past where the Earth was covered a lot in snow, and there were cycles that allowed the energy the heat to actually be retained and get us out of that. So,
Jason,
good point.
You know what? No, you're such a tease. You're such a tease. We've been trying to get you for like 3 months to come on and discuss this stuff with us. We're here to talk about science communication, and now you're finally. Is this a confirmation now in front of our audience that you will come on to discuss this with us? Yes
Absolutely.
or no, sir? Yes. Oh, okay, we've got it. All right.
You got me.
Thank you.
Good, because I want
hands raised up. I swear I will come back.
All right. What was that, Zedric?
I said thank God, because I want to get a better handle on this too, because I listen to a very wide swath of views through podcasts and different books and stuff. And there are so many conflicting stories out there. I like to get more information that I can.
Oh, all right. Well, let's wrap this up. So, Jason, if you could just sort of any final thoughts on the topic of science communication, how scientists can improve the communication of what 𝗦𝗫𝗆 had famously said when we did our last thing, getting 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. Any thoughts on that? And please make sure that you let people know where they can find you other than on In Time next month to do your thing.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. I've really appreciated being on here, and actually really enjoyed the conversation with everybody, and it kind of made me think a little bit about these topics. And in terms of the science communication piece, the one thing I want to add is in kind of thinking about what 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐕 was saying, that if you think about it, most scientists are really just concerned about their publications and grants. And when we talk about science communications and extension, this is really what we've been talking about. If you know anything about it, is the term extension in academia is extension of things like of different scientific outcomes or health outcomes to the community. Most scientists are interested primarily in publishing and their grants, and they're not really interested so much in communications to the public. So I think that this is a takeaway, is that folks in academia may need to consider differing ways of communicating, like social media. I mean, it does happen, but I think it's a very small minority. Most of my colleagues could care less about publishing on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. And I think that maybe that needs to change in order to combat some of these topics, as we were saying. How can you present your science in a way that are in bite-sized, understandable chunks to the community to combat the misinformation that is put out there? And so I think that might be a takeaway for me, is that I don't do enough of this. I focus a lot on my own research, but I don't publish a lot of content that is about climate science or other aspects. And maybe I need to rethink that. So maybe I will leave it there as kind of a takeaway of something that I took away from this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Greg, any final thoughts? Could you tell us real quick about the peer review, which is, I understand it, is going to be hosting Jason at some point reasonably soon, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him. It's cool. It is rare. He's right. It is rare that you actually get to talk to a climate scientist about climate change. And it's the issue that got me into science and wanting to contribute and trying to leave a lasting impact, positive impact on the world. I think, Jason, I think that your point is so true, and I think that there's this publisher perish mentality in academia, right, where you have to be publishing. So I think that one of the ways that we can get our money's worth for the $5,000 submission fees that all these journals are constantly charging us is maybe they could actually use their YouTube channels. You go to the Science or Nature YouTube channels, and they're awful. It's just like one little clip, maybe once a month that they publish. And I think that it should be part of every publication that these journals actually go and publish something that is to everything that's to their rigor, that is high level science, and that goes out and that's a video for every article that they publish. I think that that's something that we could talk about. But I want to communicate in this end time about in this conclusion about ways that people can actually give back to climate change. And I just want to be very clear that you don't have to be a climate scientist. You don't have to be a scientist in order to contribute and care about this issue. You can go forward with the ways that you feel like that's really important. So, and in sustainable development goals align with climate science, and these are some of the ways. I'm going to list off from the IPCC Figure 8 6 assessment. So we're talking about no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partner. So those are just all ways that people can actually, get involved, and it's not just science. So, but if you like we like these topics, my channel is the Peer Review on YouTube. You can go there by 𝗢𝗲.review. I just interviewed last week my friend that's did a bunch of algae biofuel work, and they actually did a huge breakthrough on human protein production in algae. So that was a really cool video. And we also did and talked about a lot about fermentation being kind of the future, in my opinion, in a lot of food, fuel, and item manufacturing spaces. So the materials that make up those things. We also talked about culturable meats and how important that is, and those next generation food companies. And then I also did a bunch of videos covering climate solutions and stuff with President Sunday yesterday, and those are up. So thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.
What was the what were you saying? The doom casters, or the doom? What were you calling it? The people who say it's all over and it's what did you call it?
It's doomerism, man.
Doomerism.
It's yeah.
It's tough. You know what? I'm reasonably well educated on this. We've had a couple of shows on it, my wife has a PhD in biochemistry, so I am immersed in science most of the time. But it's hard for me to not get that way and not sit there and say, Jesus, dear Lord. But we had you on to discuss the biofuels, and that really kind of turned me around on that. I very much appreciate what you had to say on that. And actually, that show isn't in the description. We should probably put that in there. I'll make sure the link gets in there, because that was
absolutely. It was an awesome show. The information in there, I had no idea. And talking about doomerism or being a doomerist, that gave me quite a hell of a lot of hope. Because it's like you're not. I'm in the transportation industry. I own and operate my own truck, and it's like you're not going to be able to turn this. There are no viable solutions at the moment for commercial freight logistics. There isn't. You just can't. Liquid natural gas isn't a solution. Batteries, electric trucks, while they sound really cool, and I think it'd be cool to have one. The amount of torque, I would love to be able to go up a 6% grade, 80,000 pounds, and maintain the speed limit. That'd be awesome. But you're not going to do that either. There's way too many logistical problems with all of the solutions that have been promoted for, the logistics sector, and you gave me hope that there's actually something that can be done, and that it's something that's viable. It's actually being done right now. And so that was an awesome episode, and I'm really glad you came on.
Oh, yep. Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
Do I get my final thought too?
Yeah, that was where I was going next. Is Andrew, what's your final thought?
My final thought is for all of the scientists and wannabe scientists that are out there, and I don't mean that negatively, the people who wish to become scientists or are on the journey to becoming scientists that have an interest in communicating to the public. They need to get on their colleagues and future colleagues a lot, and they need to impress upon them the importance that they need to be out there explaining what it is that they're doing, and hopefully explaining it well. Spread the science around, get more people out there and involved, because there are dedicated groups of people out there, especially in the United States, that are specifically putting out propaganda that is against the little bit of science that is coming out. They're there, they're purposeful, that is their whole point, and they're really good at it. So if you want to have a hope, in my opinion, if you want to have a hope of being able to capture the hearts and minds of the upcoming generations, I'm not sure you can do that to the Gen X or maybe even millennials at this point. But if you want to try and recapture that kind of sense of scientific wonderment, I think that it's incumbent upon the scientists to start caring about what the general population thinks about the science they're actually doing. Or I think that their jobs are eventually going to be going away, because the average person isn't going to care what they're doing, and eventually they're going to get phased out because their work's not making an impact on the average person. So I think that's, science communication is, I think, critically important, and we need to get more scientists doing it.
Well put.
All right. Well, what is this? What is? Hold on. Oh, it's from Christopher 𝗲𝗲. He's watching. He couldn't join us. We wanted to say Nick is the best host of any YouTube. Oh, 𝗲𝗲, thank you. Oh no, I can't read any more of that. That's just gushing. But thank you, Christopher. Please, nobody tag him in on this. nobody timestamp this one.
Before we go, I do call dibs on being on the episode when Jason's on too. I'd love to talk to him more on this. So.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I think we can arrange that. Thank you all for joining us. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, share it. It really does help us out. It helps us with the algorithm. Leave your comments. We will get back to those. If you have any comment on some of the production issues we've had, I'll pass that on to our producer, 𝐒𝐦. If you like the production, you're most welcome. I do my best. Thank you all for joining us. And oh, come on, that was funny. All right. Thank you all for joining us.
I'm immensely impressed with my production skills. If this is the output for the amount of input that I've actually, the work I've put into it, if this is the output, that's nearing miraculous. So I think I'm doing a hell of a good job here.
I couldn't agree more. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Oh, dear Lord, here comes the cough. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on tonight. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a good night.
Thank you.